This is Conservative Party State Chairman Jerry Kassar, and this is Patriots Podium. I'm pleased to welcome Ryan Girdusky, the publisher of the National Populist newsletter, a weekly update on news around the globe involving the national populist movement. He's also the founder of the 1776 Project PAC, the first nationwide political action committee dedicated to school board elections. In addition, he's the author of They're Not Listening. Patriots Podium is a regular Conservative Party podcast that brings newsmakers, elected officials, conservative leaders, and conservative thinkers to you as they participate in a discussion on a wide range of topics. Ryan, in addition to his leadership roles with the 1776 Project and the National Populist newsletter, can frequently be seen on Fox and in numerous conservative publications. He works as a political consultant and is considered a Twitter political influencer, which I completely understand what that is, but I think you might, at some point, we may want to talk a little bit more about that. I don't even know if they call you Twitter influencers anymore. Are you an ex-influencer?
I don't think that I'm an influencer because I think I only live in like one little space, but I guess they still call them Twitter influencers. I don't try hard enough, I don't think. No. People who are influencers are talking about their personal life, what food they're eating, their diets. No one really cares. I usually just talk about, election analysis or campaign stuff or whatever. I was actually, because of last night's election and special election in Queens, I was looking at gerrymandering and how bad is New York gerrymandered. And I was dumbfounded that in Brooklyn, it is so easy to draw 7 Republican assembly seats. It's almost astounding how they've gone out of their way to gerrymander Republicans in South Brooklyn as much as they have. So nothing to do with what we're talking about, but it just...
No, but actually I was with you yesterday evening and you were showing me some maps, and the reality is that you have a very good handle from the right side without being completely immersed in the establishment, which probably is one of the reasons you're a populist. So it's always good to have a conversation with you about what you're seeing. It's true. The Dems could have you sometimes have to play into the Democratic liberal theory of how they're doing it and just simply come back with candidates that match up with what they think they have created. So you've got to really be on top of your game. And I think in Brooklyn last year, they managed to be on top of their game. It's one of the reasons they picked up a bunch of seats. I think in Queens on the special, we were working in that direction. But one of the things, and we'll move on from this, I think one of the things that worked against us is that when you raise your profile on a singular type race and you're up against an enormous Democratic machine, you sometimes can't, you can scratch and pull, but you can't necessarily catch up. And anyone that was involved in that race or was following that race should be maybe not happy with the result, but should be proud of the effort.
Right. And I think that what is happening right now in the outer boroughs, specifically Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn, and the Bronx, which are all the outer boroughs, right. The transformation of working class Hispanics and Asians independently of listen, the Conservative Party works very hard. The Republican Party activists work very hard. But we are not like the Republican Party in Florida, for example, that have millions upon millions of dollars going into efforts and outreach every single year. What is happening among Asians and Hispanics and working class people, and working class white people too, is a microcosm within the 4 of the 5 boroughs that is happening nationwide. And I think it's part of a larger story about a realignment, and it's happening completely organically. I was speaking to a reporter yesterday at the event for the election, and he said, "So what do you think? Yada yada yada." And the candidate that the Republicans and conservatives had endorsed was an Orthodox Jew, and everyone had talked about which way the Orthodox Jews were going to vote. And I looked at him and I said, "Look in this room right now. It's half Asian. Right. Half the people at this victory party are Asian. That would not have happened 4 years ago."
Right. And it was reflected in the results. By the way, we're obviously talking about a September 12th election, and this is being taped on the 13th, and it'll be seen like in a week and a half. So, but just play with us because it was a very interesting happening yesterday.
Right.
That's absolutely right, and I'm aware that we also held a higher percentage of Hispanic votes than we tend to be holding. So there is growth elements that occurred last night, but the result was not what we wanted.
But look at what Trump did in 2020. If you look at Brooklyn, the Bronx, Staten Island, and Queens, and you look at pockets, South Brooklyn, Northeast and Western Queens, South Bronx, and Mid Island, Staten Island. This is a microcosm of the entire country, where
Right.
you have the vote move in from 2016 to 2020 to the right. The vote moved from 2017 to 2021 to the right, and the vote moved from 2018 to 2022 from the right. And my guess is it will move from 2021 to 2023 to the right. We'll see if that ultimately plays out in a few weeks for the city council elections. But I think New York specifically, because it is so organic, is kind of the microcosm of the overall national populist movement happening in politics right now. That is kind of dumbfounding people, who live elsewhere and can't understand it.
I agree with you. So Ryan, let's get a little bit into this. I think that a lot of school boards and school district budgets are often the forgotten element in our governing process. These boards can have broad-based power, ranging from hiring to curriculum and budgets, and at the very minimal, they play, like in New York City, significant advisory roles. It's really great to know that conservatives like yourself are playing in these key races. I want you to tell us a little about how one gets involved, with how you got involved, I should say, how someone else can get involved, and do you simply contribute to worthy candidates, or do you also directly participate in their campaigns?
So what happened was in 2021, when all the schools were closed for COVID. My godson, who lives close to me and goes to the local public school, he had a teacher that read the book "It Happened in Our Town," and the book "Race Cars," which are two books about how policemen only follow only follow black cars and they racially profile, and don't follow white cars because of white privilege and all these other contexts. And this was like a third grade or fourth grade class. And my godson's parents were incensed about it. A lot of parents were up in arms about it. The principal was called, the superintendent, the city councilman, all this other stuff. And I ended up getting roped in. And I thought, how bad is this of an issue? Well, we always hear about indoctrination kind of from a college level, but how serious is it from a grade school level? And it was very quickly in that moment where parents were at home with their children going to school with them, where everyone realized, wow, this is actually like very, very, very bad. So I made the PAC and I figured, I'll give it a shot. If it fails, no one will notice, because that's true of most people's failures. No one notices besides them. And if it's a success, then it will be great. And it was a huge success. And we've done over, we've done over 250 elections at this point. And what we do is we do independent expenditures on behalf of candidates. And we spend on behalf of them. And sometimes our spending will be, maybe $10,000 per school board race, and which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but it does go very, very far in terms of trying to reach out to voters who are not likely voters. School boards are immensely important, and they go under the radar, and they're nonpartisan in most cases. But I figured out that if we could just raise Republican voting numbers from 8% to 12 or 13%, we could flip school boards across the country. And school boards are like city council, like there's other positions, are the starting place. So a lot of people create political careers. They create a political bench. And we could really start rolling back some of the progressive ideas in public education.
So you're as essentially an IE, you all are expending your resources on campaign support that you design and execute.
Yeah. We do mailers and we do text and we do digital ads. And the whole goal is to basically raise awareness for the average Republican voter who may not know there's a school board election, or when they go to vote and the school board candidates are nonpartisan, they don't know who the Republican is. which I think almost everybody has done in their life at one point or another, to go vote, and they're like, oh, there is no parties. Who am I voting for? And they just vote for the name they like. So to raise awareness, to increase voter turnout, and then to sit there and support the most conservative candidate that we believe really can meaningfully impact schools.
So let me ask you this. Obviously, the way you're designed, a candidate's not going to call you and say spend money independently. I mean, how do you pick up on candidates that you want to support? It's a big world. How do you come about this?
Yeah, so candidates sometimes apply through our website. We do have an application process. But what we've been doing really is contacting these parent groups and these local community PACs, and they have been the ones to recruit candidates. And we ask them basically, what are like the systemic issues? If you have a problem with maybe your principal or the superintendent or whatever, that's not really a systemic issue. But if your school is doing something to promote critical race theory or critical gender theory, or really failing on a very large level for their students, I think that those are the systemic issues. And as my understanding of education has broadened, our goal of our PAC has broadened too. You know, when I started, it was about mask mandates and CRT and the trans issues and all the hot button issues. And as I really I've spoken to thousands and thousands of parents, public school parents over the country. And things that really matter to them are everything from reading grade levels to school safety. And we said, you know, we should have a conservative should care about things like why is a good school in this country a place where only 1 in 4 kids fail? I mean, a great school has as many passing numbers as those toothbrush commercials where 4 and 5 dentists approve of something. Like, I mean, that's considered a great school, is when only 1 in 4 kids fall through the cracks and fail. And we just, passing 3rd grade reading is not like saying everyone should become the next Steve Jobs or the next Elon Musk. Saying you should be able to read at a 3rd grade level should be something that a developed nation could get to and should get to. And it is the place of these superintendents and these school boards to really step up. And not to jump too far ahead, in Mississippi, there was a great article in the New York Times that kind of increased my awarenesses. In Mississippi, they had a new superintendent for public education for the state. And she was a very experienced woman, and she said, here's the deal. If you cannot read at a 3rd grade level, you cannot go to 4th grade. No exceptions. And they put a little bit more money towards early education and to try to get kids going earlier and extra help early grades. But there was no, you're falling through the cracks. You cannot go to 4th grade from 3rd grade. And the teachers union called her a racist and said this was going to hold Black kids down, and all the same tropes we hear from them anytime, teachers unions are expected not to make excuses. And I think the 3rd grade reading level scores over a 5-year period went from 49 out of 50 in the country to 21 out of 50 in just a few years, just by not letting kids fail and not allowing these loopholes. So I think that it is, if we didn't have any of the woke stuff in public education, our public education still doesn't work. So let's have conservatives who sits there and say, we want to make good citizens. We don't want children involved in political ideology that teaches them to hate themselves or to question their gender, and love this country. And at the same time, let's make sure they could read and they're in a safe environment.
Let me ask you, if a person wants to make suggestions, point you in a direction, what do they do? They just what's the website?
1776 Project PAC, PAC.com. And you can go on there. A thing pops up immediately when you go on. It's about telling us about your school. You can apply for an endorsement there. You can make a donation. And that's kind of how people communicate with us a lot.
You're good. Thank you. I mean, I it's not lost on me, I'm hopefully on this audience, how important this work is. Like you said, it can fly under the radar. I mean, a couple of months ago here, we were doing a lot of school board elections in the state, and I saw a lot of activity, but it was from parents who were not necessarily familiar with maybe the best political tactics or the best way of doing certain things, and they were really up against teachers unions, who have a built-in ability to work campaigns. So I always feel that we're at a general disadvantage, and some groups like yourself do help even the playing field. And thank you for that.
Yeah.
So let me ask you: "They're Not Listening" was one of your first forays, I would think, into the national populist movement. The publication references a number of sobering moments in politics when so-called elitists, and we can get a little bit more into that, but I think it's fairly clear who elitists are in this case, realized that Donald Trump would be president, and on a more international level, the United Kingdom would withdraw from the European Union. You now publish a weekly update or aggregator, however you want to look at it, of populist politics. What triggered your interest in national populism?
I was probably, I remember, I'm sure you remember too, because we're like political animals. But the first time you knew that the election was happening, mine was in 1996. I was 9 years old. And I was told by my teacher that there's an election for president. We might have a new president. This is what this is in this country, whatever. And I remember coming home and telling my parents, "You got to vote for Ross Perot." So I guess I was always there at an early age. But my first interest in politics was when I got older. I was against the Iraq War, and I was against amnesty for illegal aliens, which were the two fights kind of politically we're having in the nation in the second Bush term. And I felt very isolated. I didn't really relate to either party because one wanted open borders and one at the time in the late 2007s wanted to go to Iraq for 100 years. And I knew that there was a constituency for me somewhere, and that I'm a non-college educated white American man, although I don't have a lot of the same characteristics in my life or where I live or all the rest of it. But I understand people like me, and I understand that had it not been for a few things, some of which I could control, some of which I could not control, where I was born, or I never did drugs, but I never also had like a factory job that got shipped overseas. But had it not been for the grace of God and a few good decisions I would have made, I would have very well likely ended up in a position like millions of Americans are, where they feel isolated, where they are dying of despair, where they have very little opportunity. And they are the people who vote Republican for decade after decade after decade. And they are the ones who get crapped on by our elected officials. And they get ignored, and they are the least thought upon. And they are the ones that I think about. And I said to myself when I was writing the book and when I write my newsletter is, what is their perspective? What matters to them? What actually is going to affect them? And so, that's a very long-winded answer to how I got to this place and why I do how I feel, and how I think about what I do.
Well, let me ask you this. Are Republicans more populist than Democrats? I think Democrats want everybody to believe that they're populist. Are conservatives more populist than liberals? Or maybe populists just stand out on their own?
It's a hard question. I think the problem for a lot of Republicans is they are like welded to some ideologies that even though they want to change, I feel like they can change. I say that election for Trump in 2016 was like, imagine a bunch of, rabbis in ancient Palestine seeing Jesus Christ rise from the dead, and you have to sit there and say, but I don't believe this. And you have to confront your belief system and either go with it or change it. And a lot of politics is either instinctual or it's learned. And I think a lot of Republicans are trying to learn how to be more populist, at least in tone, maybe not in practice. When it comes to certain issues, Republicans are definitely very populist. But when it comes to a lot of key constituency issues for working class people, Joe Biden was better than Trump was. Joe Biden had a place-based economy, which is more about how do I get jobs within red county America in these blue collar towns. Republicans don't have an answer on healthcare, which is super problematic. But on other issues, when it comes to being populist, Democrats spend every single morning waking up and apologizing for criminals who harm working class people more than anybody in the entire world. Democrats don't give a crap that illegal aliens and mass immigration are displacing working class whatsoever, and cultural changes that make working class people feel isolated. And they did nothing, neither did Republicans, but they did nothing for 20 years to stem the opioid epidemic or wonder about the displacement of jobs from China. So I think certain politicians are better at being populist than the parties as a whole. There are a few bright spots here and there, but not many. I think overall, both parties are kind of bad on it.
Well, this brings me to my next question. Of the presidential candidates this cycle, who's winning the hearts of and hearts and minds of national populists right now?
Well, I think that Trump still has it. Not that he's my chosen candidate, but the thing that Trump has that the other Republicans don't is Trump is not an ideologue. Trump says this is wrong, and I'm going to fix it. He doesn't always give an answer to how he's going to fix it, but this is wrong. Whereas a lot of times conservatives in the more traditional sense, or the way that is conservatism has been reinterpreted in 2023 and even before that in 2015, says, well, we're going to get this outcome if we just follow the process prescribed to us. And that is not always the case. And I think that the difference between maybe more of a populist or a national populist and a traditional conservative is the process. How do we get to a certain outcome regardless of the process that takes us there? For instance, conservatives spent decades championing free trade, not all of them, but a lot of them, and including opening up China to the globe, and it was a mistake. And so what do we do now to push back on that? And some of it is not typically conservative, but it is important. I think right now, the biggest thing happening that no one is really talking about, because people get kind of hysterical when it comes to politics, especially on race, except for Democrats who love talking about it, is what's going on with after the decision with Harvard admissions, and the immense amount of discrimination that has been placed upon Asians and whites in higher admissions. But that broadens out entirely when it comes to things like government employment, government contracting. There's all these loopholes for minority and women-owned businesses. And I think, and private businesses, by the way, who deal with the government, who have discriminatory hiring practices. I think that any conservative who wants to pick the $100 bill up off the floor, that's the $100 bill waiting for them, is saying, you know what, I'm going to run for office and say it's no longer allowed to have discriminatory practices when it comes to hiring against people who vote for me, which is typically whites without a college degree.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the national populist movement outside the United States. I think there's some big differences.
Right.
In my view, anyways, once in power, the reform movements outside the United States tend to start off, in my view, with national populist movements.
Mm-hmm.
But unlike the United States, I see drifting into strong command type governments and sometimes even extreme forms of socialism and Marxism under the cover of populism as time goes by. A person gets in, and 12 years later, they went from a populist to a dictator. I mean, it's not a criticism of national populism, but it seems to reflect a certain evidentiary scenario. What's your thoughts on that?
There is definitely some merits to that, especially in places like, South America or Asia. It's not so much the case in Europe, but it is certainly the case in some places in those countries. I think that on an international scale, when it comes to populism, I think part of the question that American politicians have to ask themselves and answer this question is, if China is the global rising power and our only real challenge as a superpower nationwide. And you have a lot of populist elected leaders who are looking to build international relations for job improvement, infrastructure improvement, investment. They have two choices. The choices are the United States or China. And the old regime alliances of the West is kind of the post-World War II West, where England, France, Western Germany, the United States, a handful of Western countries, dominated the globe is not the case anymore. And the U.S. has to look past the post-World War II alliances to really become reliant on itself and manage to create infrastructured relationships with these populist leaders, because their only alternative aside from the United States is China. And I think when you walk into bed with China, you not only become dependent upon them, but you kind of lean more heavily into authoritarian principles by simply this relationship. And that's what we're seeing in Brazil. That's what we're seeing in other parts of South America. That's what we're seeing certainly throughout Africa, where these nations are becoming really indebted partners. That's what we're even seeing in places like Eastern Europe, like Hungary and Poland. They're really becoming indebted to China. And we really need to sit there and have a hard look at what are we doing as a nation. And maybe some of our post-World War II infrastructures don't work anymore to maximize prosperity and peace while promoting some form of small L liberalism.
Very interesting. Let me ask you, how can people become more in touch with you, the newsletter, the whole National Populist? You're talking about, you're bringing down to earth certain aspects of a movement that we reach up for. Mm-hmm. So and you're doing it I get your newsletter weekly. Yeah. And it's odd because frankly, you wouldn't think you really need to have a weekly newsletter on national populism. But the truth of the matter is, when you look it over, you realize you very much need to have a weekly newsletter on populism. It's like the opposite of what you would think by just reading it each week. How do we plug into you? How do we get on your subscriber list?
I try to always find stories that aren't super popular in the news. So that's what I really
you succeed, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah. That's what I really work on. You can go to, it's on substack.com, the National Populist newsletter. It's also linked on my Twitter at Ryan Girdusky, Girdusky, Girdusky. Or on my website, ryangirdusky.com, and you can sign up for it. It's a small monthly thing, but I really try hard to do political breakdowns and weekly news updates, and then some thought pieces. I just had a thought piece on all the conservative culture war victories over the summer, and yeah, I would love you to subscribe.
No, it's very good. I find it grounding, if that makes any sense.
No, I appreciate that.
Well, do you have any final words for our audience, Ryan?
Well, I just think that, national populism isn't a dirty word, and there are some people who don't always use it to the best of their ability or the best possible messengers. But I think overall, that's the way we're moving as a country, and it's a way to, I think, remake the conservative and Republican Party, and it's going to be the future.
Well, I want to say thank you for spending some time with us. I've known you for many years, actually, and consider you to be one of the more enlightened thinkers on modern conservatism. I'm just going to say to the audience, I was at a somewhat smaller dinner, and Ann Courtner, she was sitting at the table, and you and her ended up in an argument. And I thought it was kind of interesting just watching you argue with her and some of the other people at the table. You can definitely hold your own with some of the movement's best known speakers. So I value highly your work on electing conservatives to government, and I wish you great luck in the future. Our paths cross all the time. Yeah. So I don't know how many more times I'll see you by the end of the year, but it'll likely be quite a few times.
Yeah.
So thank you, Katie and Andrew, for making this podcast happen. And for our audience, we appreciate you tuning into our podcast. Our next podcast, we will be joined by the Republican leader of the state assembly, Will Barkley. Will and his assembly colleagues have been fearless in standing up to the woke Democrats who dominate the assembly. Thanks again for joining us. And if you enjoyed today's podcast, subscribe wherever you listen and give us a 5-star rating. Until next time, I'm Jerry Kassar, and this is Patriots Podium.